Ethan Carter woke up to the sound of shattering glass and distant screams. His body ached from sleeping on the hard floor of his workshop, but the stiffness was nothing compared to the unease creeping up his spine. Something was wrong. He blinked at the dim red glow outside. Fires burned across the city, black smoke curling into the sky. The streets, usually buzzing with life, were in utter chaos. People ran in all directions, some screaming, some clutching wounds, others stumbling in ways that weren't natural. A loud crash snapped his attention to the street. His neighbor, Mrs. Garcia, stood frozen outside her home, eyes wide with terror. Then they came. Rotting figures, dozens of them, lurched toward her. One leaped, sinking its teeth into her shoulder. A blood-curdling scream pierced the air as she collapsed, their clawed hands tearing into her flesh. Ethan's heart pounded. What the hell was happening? He scrambled for his radio, flipping through channels. Static. Then, a robotic voice crackled through. "This is an emergency broadcast. Stay inside. Do not engage the infected. The government is working on containment. If you are hearing this, you must." The signal cut off. A sudden bang at his workshop door. He turned, a figure slammed against the glass. The thing that used to be his coworker, Mike, stared at him with milky white eyes, blood dripping from his mouth. Ethan stumbled back. Mike was dead. He had to be. But Mike wasn't stopping. He banged again, harder. Then others joined him. Panic surged. He had to get out. Grabbing a wrench as a weapon, Ethan kicked open the back door and sprinted into the alley. The moment he stepped out, the Horde turned toward him, lifeless eyes locked onto their next meal. Then they charged. Ethan ran for his life, weaving through abandoned cars, dodging grasping hands. The city was collapsing, and if he didn't escape now, he wouldn't live to see another sunrise. Ethan pressed his back against the cold steel of the storage unit's wall, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he struggled to catch his breath. His ears rang with the distant sounds of chaos, screams, gunshots, the horrifying moans of the undead. He had barely escaped the first wave, but the city was far from safe. Carefully, he peered through a crack in the storage door. The streets were a nightmare, bodies lay torn apart, cars smoldered, and the once busy avenues were now crawling with the infected. Their hollow eyes twitched as they sniffed the air, moving in erratic patterns, searching for their next victim. He needed a plan. Supplies. A weapon. A way out. His car was parked 2 blocks away, but getting there meant navigating through the death trap the city had become. Suddenly, a scream cut through the silence. Ethan's head snapped toward the sound. A young woman was trapped inside a wrecked car, pounding against the glass as a swarm of zombies closed in on her. Her eyes met his through the windshield. Panic. Desperation. Pleading. Ethan clenched his jaw. Helping her meant risking his life. Ignoring her meant leaving her to die. He cursed under his breath. Damn it. Adrenaline surged through him as he yanked the wrench from his belt and sprinted toward the wrecked car. A desperate rescue. The zombies turned their attention toward him immediately, their dead expressions twisting into hunger as they lunged toward the sound of his footsteps. Ethan swung the wrench, cracking the skull of the nearest one. The creature collapsed, but more were coming. "Hey! Move to the passenger seat!" Ethan shouted at the woman. She scrambled over the gear shift, her face pale with fear. Ethan grabbed the side mirror of the car, braced himself, and delivered a brutal kick to the half-shattered window. The glass exploded inward, and the woman scrambled out. The undead were almost on them. "Come on!" He grabbed her wrist and yanked her forward just as rotting hands reached for her ankles. They ran. The zombies chased. Temporary shelter. The two of them darted through a back alley, dodging overturned trash cans and leaping over fallen bodies. The undead horde was slower but relentless, their groans echoing behind them. Ethan spotted a diner up ahead, the windows were still intact. A good sign. This way. He shoved open the door, and they stumbled inside. Quickly, Ethan dragged a nearby booth in front of the entrance and pushed a heavy refrigerator against the door. The undead slammed against the glass, but for now, they were safe. The woman collapsed onto the floor, clutching her knees. She was shaking. Ethan leaned against the counter, breathing hard. "You all right?" She nodded weakly. I think so." Now that he had a moment to look at her, he saw that she was in her early 20s, dressed in a ripped hoodie and jeans, her arms smeared with dirt and blood. "You're not bitten, are you?" Ethan asked. She quickly shook her head. "No. I swear." Ethan exhaled in relief. "Good. What's your name?" "Lena." "Ethan." He offered a hand, and she shook it, her grip trembling. A long silence followed as they listened to the muffled moans outside. "How bad is it out there?" Lena finally asked. Ethan glanced through the blinds. "Bad." She swallowed hard. "I had a group. We were trying to get to the evacuation center downtown. But," her voice cracked. "They left me. Said I was slowing them down." Ethan frowned. "Where's the evacuation center?" Lena wiped her face. "City Hall. But it was already falling apart when I got there. People were turning inside. There's no safe zone anymore." Ethan's stomach sank. If there was no evacuation, what hope did they have? A new plan. "We need supplies," Ethan said finally. "Weapons, food, maybe a vehicle. We can't stay here long." Lena nodded, her expression hardening. "I know a place. There's a small grocery store a few blocks from here. It might still have something left." It wasn't much, but it was a start. Ethan adjusted his grip on the wrench. "Then let's move before we're trapped in here." Lena grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. She wasn't just some scared survivor, she was ready to fight. Together, they prepared to step back into the city of the dead. The grocery store was barely standing. Ethan and Lena crouched behind an overturned car, surveying the building from a distance. The large glass windows were smashed, leaving jagged shards like the teeth of a hungry beast. The neon sign flickered, casting eerie shadows against the empty streets. But something wasn't right. "Too quiet," Ethan muttered. Lena wiped sweat from her forehead. Could mean there's nothing left, or it could mean something worse. Ethan gripped his wrench tightly. Only one way to find out. They crept forward, stepping over shattered glass and dried bloodstains. The doors hung wide open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Inside, aisles were ransacked, shelves knocked over, food scattered across the floor. Ethan scanned the area. "We move fast. Grab whatever we can." Lena nodded, slipping inside and heading toward the back. Ethan kept his weapon raised as he walked past broken cash registers. This place had already been looted, but by who? Then he heard it. A click. The unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. Not another step. Ethan froze. Slowly, he raised his hands. From behind the counter, a man stepped forward, rifle aimed directly at Ethan's chest. He had a rugged, weathered face and a cold stare that meant business. "You're trespassing," the man growled. "This store belongs to us now." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Us?" More movement, 3 others emerged from behind the shelves, all armed. One was a bulky man with a machete, another a woman with a pistol, and the third, a wiry guy with a baseball bat, grinned like he was waiting for an excuse to use it. Ethan's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a random group of survivors. These people were dangerous. The leader took a step forward, eyes narrowing. "Now tell me, what the hell are you doing in my store?" A dangerous proposition. Lena appeared from the back, stopping dead in her tracks when she saw the situation. Ethan quickly spoke before she could react. "We were just looking for supplies. We don't want trouble." The man smirked. "Funny. That's what the last guy said before we put a bullet in his head." Lena's fingers tightened around her knife. Ethan gave her a subtle look, "Don't do anything stupid. The leader circled them like a predator, his rifle still raised. See, here's the problem. People like you show up, take what isn't yours, and leave us with nothing. That doesn't sit right with me. Ethan knew where this was going. You're gonna kill us, aren't you? He said, voice steady. The man chuckled. That depends. Maybe you have something to trade. Maybe you have skills that make you worth keeping around. Ethan's mind raced. They needed a way out. Before he could speak, the man pointed his gun at Lena. She looks fast. Maybe we send her out as bait next time we need to distract the dead. Lena tensed. Ethan felt rage boil inside him, but he kept his face calm. We're mechanics, Ethan said quickly. We know how to fix cars. You need a working vehicle? We can get you one. The leader raised an eyebrow. You a mechanic? Yeah. Ethan nodded toward Lena. And she's a medic. Knows how to treat wounds. Lena shot him a quick glare but played along, nodding. The man studied them for a long moment, then finally lowered his gun. All right, he said. Maybe you're worth keeping alive. Ethan felt a brief wave of relief, but only for a second. Because the leader's smirk turned darker. Welcome to the group, he said. But let's get one thing straight, you work for us now. The real threat isn't the dead. It's the living. Ethan and Lena had no choice but to go along with it, for now. The group led them to a back room, where they had stockpiled food, water, and weapons. Ethan took note of exits, weak spots, and potential weapons. He needed a plan. Lena leaned in close and whispered, "What now?" Ethan kept his face neutral, his voice barely above a breath. We wait. We watch. And when the time is right, we take our chance. But deep down, he knew one thing for sure. The zombies weren't the biggest threat anymore. It was the people still alive. The night was thick with tension. Ethan and Lena sat near a dimly lit corner of the grocery store's back room, surrounded by crates of stolen supplies. The so-called leader, Mason, sat across from them, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. His gang, Burke, Riley, and Trey, stood nearby, drinking from bottles of water they had probably taken from another unlucky survivor. Ethan had met plenty of bad people in his life, but these ones? They were different. They weren't just survivors, they were predators. Mason had a cruel smirk as he spoke. So, you're mechanics, huh? He gestured at Ethan with the tip of his blade. That's a valuable skill. Cars break down. Generators stop working. Hell, if we find a tank, I bet you could fix that too. Ethan forced a chuckle. I'd need the right tools. Mason nodded, clearly amused. Then his eyes flicked to Lena. And a medic? We need one of those. Burke got scratched up in our last supply run. Maybe you should take a look at him. Lena hesitated. Ethan knew what she was thinking, they had no plans to stay here, so why play along? But they didn't have a choice. Fine, she said, getting up to examine Burke's arm. Ethan took the chance to scan the room. One gun near the counter. A machete strapped to Burke's leg. A bat leaning against the wall. Not much, but enough if things got ugly. He needed a plan. Fast. The warning. A few minutes later, Lena finished patching up Burke's wound. Mason stretched, tossing his knife onto the table. You two might actually be useful, he said. That's good news for you. Ethan glanced at him. And if we weren't? Mason's smirk grew. Then we'd have left you outside to slow down the horde. No hard feelings, right? Lena clenched her fists. Ethan knew she wanted to lunge at Mason right then, but that would be suicide. Mason leaned forward. Look, I get it. You're thinking about leaving. But trust me, out there? He gestured toward the broken windows. You won't last a day. The city's crawling with those freaks. And if the zombies don't get you, another group will. Ethan didn't respond. Because Mason wasn't warning him. He was threatening him. A plan for escape. Later that night, when Mason's group had settled down, Ethan and Lena were left to guard the entrance. Lena leaned in, whispering, "We need to get out. Tonight." Ethan nodded. "Agreed. But we need weapons. Supplies." Lena's eyes darted toward the counter where the gun was. "We can take them out." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Too risky. We don't know how many more are out there." "Then what?" Ethan thought for a moment. "We wait for an opening. Maybe during a supply run." Lena clenched her jaw. "We might not get another chance." Ethan sighed, knowing she was right. They needed an escape plan before it was too late. Left for dead. Morning came fast. Mason shook Ethan awake with the barrel of his rifle. "Rise and shine. We're going on a run." Ethan blinked the sleep from his eyes. "Where?" "Downtown," Mason said. "We need more ammo." Ethan's stomach dropped. Downtown was a death trap. Still, he nodded, pretending to cooperate. "All right." Lena was coming too, Mason made sure of that. The group moved through the ruined streets, sticking to alleyways. The air reeked of rotting flesh and burning metal. As they turned a corner, Mason suddenly stopped. "Damn," Burke muttered. Ethan looked ahead, and his blood ran cold. The street was swarming with zombies. A full-blown horde. Hundreds of them. Mason's smirk returned. "Guess we'll have to be fast." He turned, and shoved Ethan and Lena forward. Straight into the undead. Betrayed. Ethan barely had time to react. He stumbled as Lena screamed, catching herself just in time. Mason and his group? Already running the other way. Those sons of Ethan didn't finish. The zombies were already coming. "Move," he shouted, grabbing Lena's hand. They bolted into a nearby alley, dodging between overturned dumpsters and bodies. The undead poured in from all sides. There was no way out. A fire escape. Ethan spotted it just in time. "Lena, climb." She didn't hesitate. She scrambled up the ladder, and Ethan followed, yanking himself up just as the zombies lunged at his legs. They climbed onto the rooftop, hearts pounding. Below them, the dead screeched, clawing at the walls. Ethan collapsed onto his back, breathing heavily. Lena rolled onto her side, fists clenched. "They left us to die." Ethan stared at the sky, anger burning inside him. Mason had made a mistake. He should have made sure they were dead. Because now? Ethan was coming for him. Ethan lay on the rooftop, staring at the gray, overcast sky, his breath still heavy from the chase. Below them, the undead screeched and clawed at the walls, their rotting hands grasping for prey they couldn't reach. Mason had left them for dead. Ethan clenched his fists. That bastard thought they wouldn't survive. But Mason had underestimated them. Lena sat up beside him, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "We should have killed them when we had the chance," she muttered. Ethan exhaled sharply. "We'll get another one." Lena looked at him, her eyes dark with anger. "You really think so?" Ethan sat up. "Mason has food, weapons, shelter. And he thinks we're gone." He turned toward her, his voice steady. "That gives us the advantage." Lena's lips curled into a smirk. "You want revenge?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I want justice. Tracking the traitors." They spent the next hour navigating the rooftops, moving carefully above the zombie-infested streets. Ethan spotted a hardware store across the street with a partially collapsed roof. "Think there's anything useful in there?" Lena asked. Ethan studied the building. Only one way to find out. They climbed down carefully, avoiding the notice of the undead below. Slipping inside through a shattered window, they scanned the shelves. Jackpot. They found a crowbar, a hammer, a few nails, and, most importantly, 2 hunting knives. Ethan picked one up, testing the weight in his hand. Lena twirled hers between her fingers. Much better than a kitchen knife. Fully armed, they made their way out of the store and climbed back to higher ground. From the rooftop, Ethan spotted a trail of smoke rising in the distance. "That has to be them," Lena whispered. Ethan nodded. "Let's go." The return to the grocery store. Night had fallen by the time they reached the grocery store where Mason and his group had left them to die. Ethan crouched on the rooftop of a nearby gas station, watching the store through a pair of old binoculars he had picked up along the way. Inside, he saw Mason laughing, drinking with his group. No guards. No lookouts. They thought they had one. Lena crouched beside him. "We going in loud or quiet?" Ethan smirked. "Quiet. We make them feel what it's like to be hunted." Lena grinned. "I like the way you think. The first kill." They moved in silently, using the shadows to their advantage. Burke was outside, taking a smoke break near the back entrance. Ethan crept up behind him, knife in hand. Before Burke could react, Ethan clamped a hand over his mouth and drove the blade into his throat. Burke's body jerked as he let out a wet, gurgling noise. Then he collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. Lena smirked. "One down." Ethan wiped the blade clean. 3 to go. Turning the tables. They slipped inside. Trey was near the storage room, eating a can of beans. He didn't even hear Ethan coming. A quick, clean stab to the back of the neck, and he was gone. Lena handled Riley, slitting her throat before she could scream. Only Mason remained. Ethan wanted to drag this out. He wanted Mason to know who had come for him. He grabbed a can and threw it against the wall. The noise echoed through the empty store. Mason looked up from his seat. "What the?" Lena knocked over a stack of boxes on the other side. Mason stood, grabbing his gun. "Who's there?" Ethan stepped out from the shadows. Mason's face twisted in shock. "No. That's not possible." Ethan took a step forward, knife in hand. "You should have made sure we were dead." Mason raised his rifle, but before he could pull the trigger, Lena tackled him from behind. The gun went off, bang, but the shot missed. Ethan lunged, slamming Mason against the wall. He twisted the rifle from Mason's grip and threw it aside. Mason struggled, but Ethan's knife found its mark, deep in Mason's gut. The leader gasped, choking on his own blood. Ethan leaned in close, whispering, "That was for leaving us to die." With one final twist, Mason went still. Lena wiped sweat from her forehead. "Damn. That felt good." Ethan stood up, breathing heavily. They had won. But they weren't done yet. The gunshot had drawn attention. Outside, the undead were coming. Ethan and Lena grabbed whatever supplies they could carry and ran for their lives. The city was still overrun. But now? They had weapons. They had experience. And no one would ever betray them again. Ethan and Lena sprinted through the darkened streets, their stolen supplies strapped to their backs. Behind them, the undead swarmed into the grocery store, drawn by the gunshot that ended Mason's life. Lena glanced over her shoulder. "We got lucky. That bastard deserved worse." Ethan grunted. "We don't have time to celebrate." The streets were crawling with zombies. The city was a maze of destruction, abandoned cars, burning buildings, and the endless moans of the hungry dead. They needed a plan. Lena pointed ahead. "That bridge, it leads out of the city." Ethan hesitated. "If it's not blocked." "We don't have a choice." With no other option, they ran. The bridge of death. The bridge loomed before them, a massive highway overpass covered in wreckage and bloodstains. Bodies littered the road, some moving, some not. Abandoned vehicles were stacked against one another, forming a deadly maze. Lena bit her lip. "If we get stuck in there." Ethan scanned the area. "We move fast." No noise. They crept forward, stepping over bodies. The further they went, the more eerie it became. Then, halfway across, a loud crash. Lena's foot had knocked over a rusty metal can. The sound echoed across the bridge. A low growl came from behind them. Then another. Then, screams. The bodies they thought were dead? They weren't. Zombies lurched to life, eyes snapping open, jaws clacking as they scrambled to their feet. Lena's voice was barely a whisper. Run. A race against the horde. Ethan and Lena bolted, weaving between wrecked cars as the undead charged after them. The road was blocked ahead. A massive truck had overturned, sealing the path forward. Ethan skidded to a stop. We're trapped. Lena spotted something, a ladder leading up to a billboard. There, she shouted. They climbed, just as rotting hands clawed at their ankles. Lena kicked a zombie in the face, sending it tumbling backward. Ethan pulled her up the last few rungs. They collapsed onto the metal platform, gasping for breath. Below, the horde circled like sharks, reaching up toward them, groaning in frustration. Lena's chest heaved. That was too close. Ethan nodded. We need a new plan. Then, in the distance, a gunshot. Followed by screaming. Someone was alive. And in trouble. A desperate plea. Ethan crawled to the edge of the billboard, peering out into the city. Near a burned-out gas station, a woman and a young boy were trapped on top of a delivery truck. They were surrounded. The woman fired a handgun at the zombies below, but she was running out of ammo. The boy clutched her arm, terrified. Ethan's grip tightened on his knife. We have to help them. Lena hesitated. You sure about that? Every time we trust someone, it goes bad. Ethan looked at the boy's face, pure fear. They're not Mason, he said. We can't leave them. Lena sighed. Fine. But if they try anything, she patted her knife. They won't live long. Ethan smirked. Deal. A daring rescue. They climbed down carefully, using the chaos of the bridge to stay hidden. When they reached the gas station, the woman spotted them. Her eyes went wide. Help us, she called, her voice hoarse. Ethan nodded. Stay put. We'll clear a path. Lena pulled out her hunting knife. I hope you have a plan. Ethan glanced at a rusty pickup truck nearby. The keys were still inside. A dangerous idea formed in his mind. I'll draw them away. You get them down. Lena frowned. That's suicide. Ethan climbed into the truck, gripping the wheel. Only if I get caught. He jammed the keys into the ignition and turned. The engine roared to life. The zombies snapped their heads toward him. Ethan slammed his foot on the gas. The truck barreled forward, smashing into the horde, sending bodies flying. Lena took the opportunity. She ran to the truck where the woman and boy were trapped. Jump, she shouted. The woman hesitated, then grabbed the boy and leaped down into Lena's arms. Meanwhile, Ethan swerved the truck around, leading the remaining zombies away. But then, disaster. The engine coughed. The truck stalled. The zombies turned back toward him. Ethan cursed. Damn it. Then, bang. A gunshot rang out. The woman had fired her last bullet, taking down a zombie about to grab Ethan. Lena waved frantically. Move. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He bolted toward them, vaulting over the hood of the truck. They sprinted into a nearby alley, leaving the horde behind. Finally, after what felt like hours, they stopped to catch their breath. The woman looked at Ethan and Lena, eyes filled with gratitude. You saved us, she whispered. Thank you. Ethan studied her. She was tough, but exhausted. And the boy, he was barely 9 years old, shaking with fear. Lena crossed her arms. So, who the hell are you? The woman took a deep breath. My name is Sarah. And this is my son, Noah. Ethan nodded. I'm Ethan. That's Lena. Sarah wiped the sweat from her brow. We had a group, but they're gone. We've been running ever since. Ethan exchanged a glance with Lena. This world was brutal. No one lasted long alone. He turned back to Sarah. You don't have to run anymore. Stick with us. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Ethan didn't know if trusting them was the right move. But one thing was clear. The four of them were stronger together. And in a world like this, that was the only way to survive. Ethan, Lena, Sarah, and Noah moved silently through the ruined city, sticking to the shadows. They had weapons. They had supplies. But they didn't have a safe place to go. Sarah glanced at Ethan. Where are we heading? Ethan adjusted the strap on his backpack. Somewhere we can lay low. Maybe the suburbs, less crowded, easier to clear. Lena scoffed. You sure about that? I've seen more zombies in neighborhoods than downtown. Sarah frowned. What about an outpost? There has to be one still standing. Ethan shook his head. The last one I saw was Outrun. People either died or turned on each other. Noah clung to his mother's side, his eyes darting around fearfully. Ethan sighed. For now, let's just find shelter for the night. Lena smirked. Then let's break into someone's house. A house that wasn't empty. They found a small, 2-story house at the edge of the city. It looked abandoned. No broken windows, no open doors, just an eerie silence. Ethan raised a hand. I'll check it first. Knife in hand, he pushed the door open. The living room was covered in dust, the furniture untouched. A rotting smell lingered in the air, but not as strong as a fresh corpse. Ethan checked the kitchen, nothing. The hallway, clear. Then he heard it. A creak from upstairs. He froze. His grip on the knife tightened as he motioned for Lena and Sarah to stay put. He climbed the stairs slowly, heart pounding. A door at the end of the hallway was slightly open. He pushed it. Inside was a bedroom, the walls covered in children's drawings. And in the corner, a figure sat hunched over. A man, rocking back and forth. Ethan took a cautious step forward. Hey, you okay? The man's head snapped up. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. Not a zombie. But not sane either. His lips curled into a twisted smile. You shouldn't be here. A battle in the dark. Before Ethan could react, the man lunged. Ethan dodged, barely avoiding the rusted knife aimed at his throat. The man screamed like a wild animal, slashing wildly. Ethan grabbed his wrist, struggling to keep the blade away. They crashed into a bookshelf, books spilled everywhere. Lena came rushing in. What the hell? The man shoved Ethan back and charged at Lena. Lena didn't hesitate. She swung her knife, slashing deep into the man's stomach. He stumbled, gasping. Sarah appeared in the doorway, aiming a gun she had taken from Mason's stash. Bang! The shot echoed through the house. The man collapsed. Dead. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Noah whimpered, clutching Sarah's arm. Ethan cursed. That gunshot, it's going to bring them. Trapped inside. The sound of moaning started almost immediately. Zombies were closing in. Lena peeked through the window. At least a dozen. More coming. Ethan kicked the dead man's body aside and looked around the house. We can't stay. Sarah checked the ammo in her gun. We fight our way out. Ethan shook his head. We don't have enough bullets. Then Noah pointed at something. Basement. They turned. A door near the kitchen led downward. Lena made a face. Hiding in a basement? That's how people die in movies. Ethan sighed. Unless you have a better idea. She groaned. Fine. But if we get trapped, I'm blaming you. They hurried down into the darkness, shutting the door behind them. Something was down there. The basement was cold and damp. Shelves lined the walls, filled with canned food and supplies. Noah clung to Sarah as they moved deeper. Then Lena whispered, Did you hear that? A rustling sound came from the corner. Ethan raised his knife. A figure stumbled forward. A woman, pale and sickly, her eyes sunken and lifeless. Not a zombie, not yet. Sarah gasped. She's infected. The woman collapsed onto her knees, looking up at them with hollow eyes. I tried to hold on, she croaked. Her arms were covered in bite marks. Noah hid his face against Sarah's shoulder. The woman looked at him. Is that my son? Sarah's face paled. No. He's not yours. The woman shuddered. Then her body began to convulse. Lena grabbed Ethan's arm. She's turning. The woman let out a low, guttural growl. Her eyes turned milky white. Then she lunged. A close call. Ethan reacted fast, stabbing her in the neck before she could reach Noah. Blood sprayed across the floor as the woman collapsed, twitching violently. Then, she stopped moving. Noah sobbed quietly. Sarah held him close. It's over. Ethan wiped his blade clean. We need to go. Now. Lena cracked the basement door just enough to peek out. The zombies had broken inside. They were searching. Lena whispered, they don't know we're down here. Yet. Ethan's mind raced. They had to escape before they were found. Then he noticed something, a second door at the back of the basement. A way out. He turned to the others. We're not dying here. Follow me. Sarah nodded, holding Noah tight. Lena twirled her knife. Let's do this. Ethan led the way, pushing open the door. Straight into the unknown. Ethan pushed open the basement's hidden door, revealing a narrow underground tunnel, probably built as a storm shelter or escape route. It smelled of damp earth and decay, but at least it wasn't filled with zombies. Lena whistled. Guess we got lucky. Ethan wasn't convinced. Nothing in this world was ever that easy. Behind them, the muffled groans of zombies shuffling through the house sent a clear message: they were out of time. Sarah clutched Noah's hand. Let's move. They stepped into the dark tunnel, sealing the door behind them. Into the unknown. The tunnel was tight and claustrophobic, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. Ethan led the way, gripping his knife, while Lena followed behind, keeping her gun ready. No one spoke. Every step echoed, making them hyper-aware of just how vulnerable they were. Then, a noise. A soft shuffling ahead of them. Ethan froze. Someone's here. Lena raised an eyebrow. Or something. Ethan motioned for silence. He crept forward, heart pounding. Then, a figure stumbled out of the shadows. A man, half-starved and trembling, his face gaunt. His eyes darted between them in fear. Please, don't kill me. A desperate stranger. Sarah hesitated. You're not bitten, are you? The man shook his head frantically. No. I swear. I was hiding down here, but I heard the gunshot. Thought you were looters. Ethan studied him carefully. The guy looked weak, desperate, but not dangerous. Lena crossed her arms. You alone? The man nodded. I had a group, but they didn't make it. His voice cracked. It's just me now. Ethan sighed. Trusting strangers never ended well. But right now, they had bigger problems. Is there another way out of here? He asked. The man pointed further into the tunnel. There's a ladder at the end, it leads up to an abandoned warehouse. Ethan exchanged a glance with Lena. Worth a shot, she muttered. The final climb. They hurried through the tunnel, the sound of zombies growing louder behind them. At the end, the man gestured to a rusty metal ladder leading up to a trapdoor. Ethan tested it. Old, but sturdy. He turned to the others. I'll go first. If it's clear, I'll signal. Carefully, he climbed, pushing the trapdoor open. It creaked, loudly. Ethan froze, listening. Silence. He climbed out, scanning the warehouse. Empty. Relief flooded him. It's clear. Come on. One by one, they climbed up. Sarah lifted Noah onto the ladder, guiding him with steady hands. Then, a terrifying screech. Zombies had found the tunnel entrance. The half-starved man panicked. They're coming. Lena shoved him toward the ladder. Then climb faster. The warehouse showdown. As soon as they were all inside, Ethan slammed the trapdoor shut. Lena dragged a heavy metal crate over it, sealing it shut, just in time. Beneath them, furious pounding echoed through the floor. Ethan exhaled. That won't hold forever. The warehouse was massive, filled with rusted machinery and broken skylights that let in pale moonlight. Lena pointed. There's the exit. A pair of large double doors stood at the far end. Sarah frowned. You think it's safe? Ethan smirked. Only one way to find out. They moved quickly, stepping over debris. Then, a deep growl. Noah gasped. What was that? A shadow moved in the rafters. Ethan's stomach dropped. They weren't alone. The final threat. A zombie dropped from above, landing hard on the concrete floor. But this wasn't normal. Its muscles were swollen, its eyes black, and its jaws unnaturally wide, like something straight out of a nightmare. A mutated zombie. Sarah's grip on Noah tightened. Oh my God. Lena cursed. That thing is not normal. The creature roared, its sound echoing through the warehouse. Ethan didn't hesitate. Run. A fight for survival. They sprinted toward the exit, but the mutant was fast. It leaped onto a pile of crates, its movements animalistic. Then, it charged. Ethan barely dodged as clawed fingers swiped past his face. Lena fired, bang. The bullet hit its shoulder, but it barely flinched. Ethan grabbed a rusty metal pipe and swung with all his strength. Crack! The creature staggered, but didn't fall. Lena fired again, this time, hitting its kneecap. The zombie lurched, falling onto one hand. Ethan saw his chance. With a shout, he drove his knife straight into its skull. The creature let out a final, guttural snarl. Then it collapsed. Silence. The road ahead. Sarah gasped for breath, holding Noah close. Lena wiped blood from her face. That was the worst thing I've ever seen. Ethan yanked his knife free. Let's hope it's the last. They turned toward the warehouse doors. With a grunt, Ethan pushed them open. Outside was a dark, open road. Empty. Sarah exhaled. We made it. Lena smirked. For now. Ethan stared at the horizon. They had escaped the city, but the world was still falling apart. And out there, the apocalypse was only beginning. No safe zones. No guarantees. But at least, they weren't alone. Ethan turned to the group. Let's keep moving. And together, they stepped into the unknown. The end. Or just the beginning.